Wide receiver is wonderful. Wide receiver is beautiful. Thank goodness for the wide receiver position. Guys, we're going to go through the tiers and rankings here very early on for 2024 on the ADP Average Dudes podcast. So this is our third positional preview here from way far downtown as we go through wide receivers. We've already done quarterbacks. We've already done running backs, so check those out as well. This is wide receiver, and wide receiver is just such a nice, lovely position. And the popularity of PPR leagues just makes it even more fun because that means all these players get to be even better than they would be in non-PPR and traditional scoring. So let's start out with the very top. And it's an interesting top group because I got 5 guys in my tier 1. And I think they all make a really strong case for being number 1 overall among wide receivers. So let me know in the comments down below, who is your number 1 wide receiver? CeeDee Lamb is number 1 for me, followed by Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Again, all 5 of these guys are in that top tier conversation. They all have that upside to be the number 1 wide receiver in the NFL. They're all attached to quarterbacks that are really strong. They're all attached to really good offenses. I mean, they're part of the reason why their offenses are good, but I'm totally all in on all 5 of these guys. I think you can make the argument in PPR that these could be the first 5 picks off the board. Someone's going to go McCaffrey for sure. Someone will do it. But I think if you want to be a little bit risk averse and you want to go wide receiver for each of the first 5 picks, I think we're going to see a world where that can be what happens. So to me, it's actually a pretty hard and fast line here. I don't really think there's much dispute to be had as far as the start of tier 2. For me, it's Puka, Garrett Wilson, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Adams. All guys I'm quite happy with being my wide receiver 1. I'm just disappointed that I didn't get a higher pick is really what it comes down to. If you do an auction league, if you do a salary cap draft, I would definitely be targeting those top 5 guys and not want to settle for this group. But in a snake draft and a standard draft, you may just not have a choice because you're picking 8th, right? And you didn't get a chance to go get Jamar Chase. So you're going to take Garrett Wilson, be happy with it. The good news is all 4 of these guys absolutely have that upside, have that potential to be at the mega elite tier as well. However, I do see a path for each of them where things can go a little bit awry. Puka Nacua, greatest rookie year of all time, but Cooper Kupp is also in this offense, and Cooper Kupp is going to be healthy, assumed, going into the season. Garrett Wilson, his quarterback is 40-something years old, coming off a torn Achilles. Bit worried about that personally. I think it'll be pretty good for this year. I'm more worried about for that 2025 than I am for 2024. A.J. Brown, this offense is changing a lot in Philly. And A.J. Brown wasn't that great in the second half of last year. Actually, it was a bit of a mess from time to time in the second half of last season. So I'm a little worried about that with A.J. Brown. And then Devontae Adams, look, this offense is poopy. And he's really, really good, but it's hard to trust any Raider at this point. And Gardner Minshew hopefully just hyper-targets him down the field and makes something happen, but I'm very worried about this offense in Vegas. My third tier of wide receivers, it's similar to the second one, where I actually see a ton of upside with these guys as well, and I can see a world where these guys all do finish at wide receiver 6. However, the downside is even higher for these guys, potentially as being complete flameouts potentially. So this is a pretty big tier. This is Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk, DJ Moore, Michael Pittman, Chris Olave, Drake London, Jalen Waddle, Rashee Rice, Deebo Samuel, and Cooper Kupp. So all these guys have in common the upside, and we've seen it out of a lot of them, right? DJ Moore just had an outstanding year last year. Of course, we know what Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel can do. Jalen Waddle, he's another one who's been, right there at the very top before. Drake London just got a quarterback now for the first time in his career. So all these guys have massive, massive upsides, but I do feel less likely about them hitting that wide receiver 6 benchmark than I do about the previous tier. I'm also just a bit, there's a few extra paths for each of them disappointing than there are for that previous tier, right? With Devontae Adams, I really just see it being like one path of disappointment versus a player like a Nico Collins. I see 2 paths, right? Where CJ Stroud potentially takes a step back in his second year after an amazing rookie year, or Nico Collins himself regresses back after being, kind of nothing for 3 years and then totally breaking out. Or Tank Dell just passes on the depth chart and becomes the number 1 target in this offense. So these are all guys where I see multiple ways where things kind of go a little bit wrong. Not to say that there's a bunch of bust candidates in this tier. I think they all have a ton of upside. I really love this whole group. I would happily have two of these players on my roster in my starting lineup every single week. I just do see a bit more paths for things to go wrong with this group of guys. So this next tier are guys who I think the wide receiver 1 upside probably isn't there, but strong wide receiver 2 upside is, but they do have similar questions to that previous tier. So this is T. Higgins, Tank Dell, DK Metcalf, and Devonta Smith, and Christian Kirk as well. He was kind of a late addition for me into this tier. So these are guys, for the most part, they're actually not the number one target getter in their offense. Targets are a question for all these guys. T. Higgins, of course, he's got Jamar Chase. Tank Dell has Nico Collins. Devonta Smith, he's got A.J. Brown. And then also just add in Saquon Barkley, who's going to just take passing plays away from this offense. DK Metcalf, he's a target leader, but he's never been a high target player. I think Tyler Lockett actually led the team last year in targets. So just targets are every question there as well. Christian Kirk is really the one guy in this entire tier of players who targets aren't too much of a concern for. He should be the leading target getter in this offense now that Calvin Ridley's out the door. Gabe Davis comes in. The question with Christian Kirk, though, is what are you really getting with Christian Kirk? Even if he's the target leader, how great is that really? We saw it 2 years ago, and it's a top 15 kind of wide receiver. It could be pretty good, but I don't think it could ever be pretty great, with Christian Kirk. So all these guys kind of wide receiver 2 upside, high-end wide receiver 2 upside. These are my wide receivers 20 through 24, so they should be wide receiver 2s. But none of them I don't quite see having that like wide receiver 6 upside. So this next tier of players I have labeled as old and scary. And these are some of my favorite players throughout my history of fantasy football. Some players who I have been very, very right about over the years, continuing to stand beside and pretty much never considering these guys to be anything but really, really good. It's Stephon Diggs, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, and Amari Cooper. Cooper being the one exception here in that I've been pretty low on Amari Cooper for most of his career. But the other three, man, these are guys who I've been through a lot in fantasy football with, right? Stephon Diggs, I drafted him all over the place his first year in Buffalo. Mike Evans, I've had him, seemingly on an A team every single year of his career. Keenan Allen, same thing for, I nailed that pick way back when he first kind of emerged with the Chargers. So this hurts. This is painful. But all of them are at ages now where there's a reason why I have a lot of good memories with them, because they've been around forever. And unfortunately, in fantasy football, at some point, those ages do scare you off, and those ages do they hit, right? And so all four of these guys are guys who I have below guys who I think have massive upside and young players in their primes. For one of these four players, it will probably hit in a big, big way, and they will probably be a top 12. They'll leapfrog the previous 2 tiers of players for one of the 4. I would say 2 of the 4 will probably fall off the map completely and bottom out this season. And then one of the 4 will probably finish as like wide receiver 30. Problem is, I don't know which one's which. Stephon Diggs had a miserable second half of the season after the offensive coordinator change to Joe Brady. And oh, by the way, he is still their offensive coordinator. That's not going away. Mike Evans, as great as he was last year, it is another 8-year older. Baker Mayfield was really, really good last year, but we've seen Geno Smith, who Baker Mayfield was being comped to a year ago, right? A year ago. Baker Mayfield, he's going to be this year's Geno Smith, and he was. He was really, really good. But then Geno Smith kind of turned into a pumpkin. So is Baker Mayfield going to be this year's Geno Smith again and kind of turn into a pumpkin? I'm very worried about that. Keenan Allen. If Keenan Allen were still in the Chargers, he would not be this low for me. He was about 12 spots higher in my rankings before that trade. But now he's probably the number 2 wide receiver on a team with a rookie quarterback. It's just red flags all over the place. And again, another guy at his age, when more red flags pop up, I'm very concerned. When age is the only red flag, sometimes I can bypass it. But for Keenan, with all those other things now, I just can't. Amari Cooper, for him, age is the biggest one for sure, but quarterback play also. Deshaun Watson just being absolutely terrible. And him being the quarterback for this year. Cooper really benefited a lot from other quarterbacks, specifically Joe Flacco. We remember his game against the Cowboys. Late in the season where he just had that absolutely monster game in the fantasy playoffs. That probably doesn't happen this year. And so, with his age and that offense, I'm very, very concerned. So this is the tier now that I called fun, but I have no idea what to do with you. This is George Pickens, Hollywood Brown, Zay Flowers, Calvin Ridley, and Jordan Addison. They're all fun players. They really are. Some more so than others. I love Hollywood. I love Zay. I love Pickens. I love Addison. I haven't been a big Calvin Ridley guy, but he goes to Tennessee, and I'm a little excited about what that offense is shaping up to be there in Tennessee. I think it's going to have some real opportunities out there. Addison, look, right now it's Sam Darnold, but don't get too caught up into that. It will probably be a rookie very quickly into next season. Rookie quarterback, second weapon, and you're not as good of a player as Keenan Allen. A lot of red flags there for Jordan Addison, but he was so much fun. He was so good as a rookie. But the second half for him was much more up and down, much more down even than up for Jordan Addison last year. So that's going to be a bit worried about him. George Pickens, no Deontay Johnson anymore. Is Russ decent? Is really kind of the question for me with George Pickens. Because if Russ can just throw him deep, and man, I think Pickens can make something happen with that and be very much kind of a boom-bust flex. You're going to have weeks where Pickens is in your lineup and he puts up a dud. But you're also going to have weeks where he puts up the biggest number on your team and wins you because of it. So that's going to be the George Pickens experience. It's probably going to be the Hollywood Brown experience. That's probably going to be the Zay Flowers experience as well. Flowers kind of a winner so far this offseason as the Ravens have shown no interest in really upgrading their wide receivers. They seem to just want to replace Odell with an Odell caliber receiver at this point. So they're looking at like Michael Gallup and Josh Reynolds. So if there's no upgrades in this offense, Zay Flowers becomes much more intriguing to me. So this next tier, guys, are the group that I'm very okay with as being flex options on my team. So that's Terry McLaurin. It's a big group here, too, by the way. It's Terry McLaurin, DeAndre Hopkins, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Josh Palmer, Deontay Johnson, Chris Godwin, Cortland Sutton, Demario Douglas. And there's not a whole lot of common threads for these guys. A lot of them are on bad offenses, right? You look at like a Terry. Hopkins in Tennessee may not be good. Josh Palmer in LA may not be very good offense. But you have the Green Bay guys that are also, offense I'm a bit more excited about. And it's guys who I don't want to count every week, but I'm sure they will have weeks where they have good matchups. They go off, right? They're those stereotypical flex type of wide receivers. And those are very useful to have as well. And they're all different, of course. I'm painting a bit of a broad brush here with the tiers. Obviously, there's a big difference in what Christian Watson is versus what Chris Godwin is, right? Just from a kind of upside stylistic standpoint. By and large, though, these guys are going to be pretty good target getters, right? Terry McLaurin in Washington, DeAndre Hopkins, Jaden Reed, Josh Palmer, Deontay Johnson, Cortland Sutton, Demario Douglas, all those guys really could or should maybe lead their team in targets. So that's one thing that's exciting to find down here in like the late 30s, early 40s even of these rankings are guys who are still going to get a significant amount of targets and don't have a whole lot in front of them. However, quarterback play is going to be an issue for most of these guys. They're just a little bit hit and miss in that regard. It's why they're in the late 30s, early 40s though. And again, rookie wide receivers are coming. Many of them will either be in this tier or above this tier, or in Marvin Harrison Jr.'s case, he'll be like 3 tiers above these guys. So then down here, the last tier we're going to talk about is the young mystery box, probably nothing, but could be something tier. That's Jackson Smith and Jigba, that's Jameson Williams, that's Michael Wilson. And these are 3 guys all who could be just absolutely nothing, probably are nothing, honestly. But they are all mystery boxes with good upside, though. Guys who have shown some stuff here and there. JSN actually kind of hasn't, but he was the first round pick of the group here and just a year ago. So, like, I'm still excited by the idea of JSN. Still think back to what he did at the Ohio State in college and the high draft capital he got from Seattle. And there's just still is potential and upside there. All 3 of those guys do have potential and upside. I find it unlikely they hit, however. So that puts a wrap on the wide receiver position. Thank you very much for joining me along for that ride. This is much more fun than running backs for sure. I mean, gosh, we went about 40 players deep here, and guys where I'm like, oh, I actually really want to have this player on my team. I think these guys are all really useful assets. So that's exciting for sure. Guys, who are some wide receivers that you are looking forward to? And like I asked the question at the top of the episode, who is your wide receiver 1? Is it CeeDee Lamb? Is it Jamar Chase? Is it still Justin Jefferson? Is it Tyreek Hill or is it Amon-Ra St. Brown? Or are you totally crazy and is it somebody else? Let me know how you're feeling about that number 1 overall wide receiver in the comments down below. And stick around because we're going to talk about tight ends here in the coming days.